Happy Haunting Amelia Bedelia by Herman Parish, pictures by Lynn. When Amelia Bedelia arrived for work, she could not believe her eyes. "Oh my gosh," said Amelia Bedelia. "What has happened to the house?" "This is terrible," said Amelia Bedelia. "Mr. and Mrs. Rogers must need me. Someone ruined their house." She ran to the front door. "Ah!" yelled Amelia Bedelia. "Help!" Mr. and Mrs. Rogers rushed outside. "Hold still," said Mrs. Rogers. "I'll get those bats out of your belfry." "Ha," said Mr. Rogers. "That'd be a full-time job. She has made me bats for years." "You are untangled, Amelia Bedelia," said Mrs. Rogers. "Come inside and relax." "Wow," said Amelia Bedelia. "Who wrecked your house?" "We did," said Mrs. Rogers. "We're getting ready for Halloween." "Is that tonight?" said Amelia Bedelia. How did you forget?" said Mrs. Rogers. "Those bats on the front porch must have made you batty." "Sorry," said Amelia Bedelia. "I have been very busy. I was at school helping the children make their costumes." "Good for you," said Mrs. Rogers. We invited all our neighbors for a Halloween party, and you too. Tonight, the best costume wins a prize." "Gosh," said Amelia Bedelia. "Your house looks spooky." "Thank you," said Mrs. Rogers. "The spookier the better." "That's the idea," said Mr. Rogers. "What fun," said Amelia Bedelia. "I will help you clean up." "No, you won't," said Mr. Rogers. "I worked hard to get this place to look shabby." "Well, then I will help you mess it up," said Amelia Bedelia. "What should I do first?" "Hand me that hammer," said Mr. Rogers. "But first, crack a window. It's gotten very warm in here." "Crash! Uh-oh," said Amelia Bedelia. "I just tried to crack it, but I broke it instead." "Amelia Bedelia," said Mr. Rogers, "I meant to open the window a bit." "It is open," said Amelia Bedelia, "but there are lots of bits and pieces." "It's not your fault, dear," said Mrs. Rogers. "Besides, the broken window makes our house look truly haunted." Mr. Rogers shook his head and said, "I think you both have gone batty." "What is next?" said Amelia Bedelia. "Let's see," said Mrs. Rogers. "There are a lot of people coming tonight. We should add a leaf to the table." "A leaf?" said Amelia Bedelia. "Yes, of course," said Mrs. Rogers. "A leaf or two makes the table look larger. Do you know where we could find the leaves?" "Of course I do," said Amelia Bedelia. "Before you go," said Mr. Rogers, "please hand me that witch." "That witch what?" said Amelia Bedelia. "Not what," said Mr. Rogers. "Which?" "What witch?" said Amelia Bedelia. "Not which what," said Mr. Rogers. "That witch there, with the pointy hat." Amelia Bedelia held up two witches. "They both have pointy hats," she said. "Which one do you want?" "Whichever," said Mr. Rogers. "No, I mean, whatever witch. Which, oh, skip it. Just get those leaves." Amelia Bedelia skipped away. "Good thing it's fall," said Amelia Bedelia. "I can get tons of leaves for the table." She saw something wiggle under the leaf. "Sorry, Mr. Worm, but back out you go," she said. "Yoo-hoo!" called Mrs. Rogers from the window. "There's no time for yard work. I need your help." Amelia Bedelia went inside. "Now there we go," said Amelia Bedelia. "Now the table looks smaller to me, but it's so much prettier." Mrs. Rogers always has great ideas. Amelia Bedelia went into the kitchen. "There you are," said Mrs. Rogers. "You are so creative with food. Let's cook up some Groomus goodies." "Goody," said Amelia Bedelia. "This is worm casserole. Needs more spaghetti." Cranberry juice makes a tasty vampire punch. Crumble up cookies for the kitty litter cake. We need more eyeballs. I'll peel another bunch of grapes. Dried apricots make delicious ears." There was a knock at the kitchen door. "Trick or treat," said Cousin Alcu. I didn't know any tricks," said Amelia Bedelia, "but I can sample you some treats." "Thank you," said Cousin Alcu. Mr. Rogers walked into the kitchen. "Something smells good," he said. Well, it sure isn't me, said Cousin Alku. I've been working very hard. I harvested a load of pumpkins for the party tonight. How generous, said Mr. Rogers. Do you know how to carve jack-o'-lanterns? I did one, said Cousin Alku. He showed them his pumpkin. That face looks very familiar, said Amelia Bedelia. Mr. Rogers tried not to laugh. Very funny, said Mr. Rogers, but that pumpkin is too handsome. Have you gotten anything scarier? Wait here, said Cousin Alku. He went out to his truck. Cousin Alku returned with the scariest scarecrow ever. Meet Oswald, said Cousin Alku. He scares the birds for miles. Oh, said Mrs. Rogers. He sends shivers down my spine. Oswald can sit here for tonight. He doesn't scare me, said Mr. Rogers. I do not know the meaning of the word fear. You don't? Said Amelia Bedelia. The word fear is in the dictionary. I'll look it up for you. Show me later, said Mr. Rogers. I must get my costume ready. I'm going to be a circus strongman. And I'm going to be a queen, said Mrs. Rogers. Amelia Bedelia, what's your costume going to be? Gee, said Amelia Bedelia, I do not have a costume. Sure you do, said Mr. Rogers. You wear your costume every day. Mrs. Rogers glared at her husband. What do you mean? said Amelia Bedelia. These are my clothes, not a costume. I have always dressed like this. Mr. Rogers felt bad about what he said. He was too embarrassed to say anything. Come on, Amelia Bedelia, said Mrs. Rogers. I have an idea for you for Cousin Alku. See you tonight, said Mr. Rogers. Amelia Bedelia did not reply. Woo! Creak! That night, as darkness fell, the house really did look haunted. Spooky music with spooky, scary sounds made it even more fun. Floorboards creaked, chains rattled, moans and groans filled the air. Clankety clank clank. Yee! Ding dong, the doorbell rang. Our first trick-or-treater, said Mrs. Rogers. Would you get the door, dear? Yes, Your Majesty, said Mr. Rogers. As soon as he was out of sight, Mrs. Rogers ran back to the door. While Mr. Rogers handed out treats at the front door, Mrs. Rogers let in a trick at the back door. Right this way, said Mr. Rogers. Thank you, said a skeleton. I was dying to come in. The party food was a big hit. Care for an eyeball? Said a girl to her dad. Yuck, he said. Yum, she said. They are good and disgusting. Try some finger food, said Mr. Rogers. Oh, cool, said the boy. These cookies have little fingers. They were Amelia Bedelia's idea, said Mr. Rogers. Where is she? Asked the boy. Good question, said Mr. Rogers. May I have 2 cups of blood? Asked a girl. My pleasure, said Mrs. Rogers. I love your costumes. Amelia Bedelia helped us, said a little boy. Wonderful, said Mrs. Rogers. Maybe you will win the prize. Have you seen Amelia Bedelia? Said Mr. Rogers. Not yet, said Mrs. Rogers. She might not come, thanks to you. What did I do wrong? said Mr. Rogers. You know, said Mrs. Rogers. You made fun of her clothes. I feel terrible, said Mr. Rogers. I will apologize when I see her. Just then, Mr. Rogers shrugged. What is wrong? Said Mrs. Rogers. It sounds silly, said Mrs. Rogers. That scarecrow gives me the creeps. Scaredy cat, said Mrs. Rogers. It looks alive, said Mr. Rogers. I feel like it's watching me. Ding dong. Mr. Rogers jumped. Relax, said Mrs. Rogers. You're imagining things. Go see who's at the door. Mr. Rogers opened the door. He smiled a big smile. Well, well, he said. I have never been so glad to see a ghost. Do come in. Amelia, Miss Ghost? Woo, said the ghost as it floated into the house. Mr. Rogers was a perfect host. Care for any refreshments? He said. The ghost shook its head no. Well, said Mr. Rogers, would you like to judge our costume contest? The ghost nodded yes. Attention, everyone, said Mr. Rogers. It is time for our Halloween contest. Anyone who wishes to compete for the prize, step this way. I am Sunny Day, your TV weatherman. I forecast that I will win. You can't beat peace and love. This hippie has the grooviest t-shirt and bell bottoms. If I win, I will still be in a pickle. I am all eyes. I am all ears. And I am right under your nose. Bravo, said Mrs. Rogers. Yes, said Mr. Rogers. I can tell that Amelia Bedelia helped them a lot, too. Too bad she could not be here tonight. He winked at Mrs. Rogers. Just then, the clock struck 10. Okay, everyone, said Mrs. Rogers. Time to take off your masks. Uh-oh, said the ghost. It tried to slip away. Whoa there, said Mr. Rogers. It's time I put my foot down. Mr. Rogers stepped on the sheet. As the ghost kept walking, the sheet kept pulling off. The sheet was pulled off to reveal Cousin Alcoo, said Mr. Rogers. Where's Amelia Bedelia? Cousin Alcoo looked very afraid. He pointed behind Mr. Rogers. His mouth opened to speak, but he was scared speechless. Mr. Rogers wheeled around. Boo! Screamed the scarecrow. Yee! Screamed Mr. Rogers. He threw his barbell up in the air. Mr. Rogers turned around and ran right into Cousin Alcoo. They both fell in a heap. Happy Halloween, said Amelia Bedelia. Amelia Bedelia, said Mr. Rogers. Ha ha, said Cousin Alcoo. I think you should call her Amelia Bedelia. Bravo! Hooray! Yippee! As your queen, said Mrs. Rogers, I declare that Amelia Bedelia is the winner for the best costume. The next day, Amelia Bedelia and Cousin Alcoo came to help clean up. Great party, said Cousin Alcoo. Thank you, said Mrs. Rogers. We'll do it again next year. Start planning your costume now. I will, said Amelia Bedelia. But you have the best ideas. Those trick-or-treats, said Mr. Rogers. Somebody piled leaves on our table. That was me, said Amelia Bedelia. That was lovely, said Mr. Rogers. They made a beautiful centerpiece. Mrs. Rogers showed Amelia Bedelia how to add a leaf to their table. There we go, said Mrs. Rogers. Now it's time to set the table for lunch. Amelia Bedelia, said Mr. Rogers, I apologize for what I said yesterday. Apology accepted, said Amelia Bedelia. Try some leftover worm casserole. Mr. Rogers took a huge portion. It's very tasty, he said. Glad you like it, said Amelia Bedelia. I got worried yesterday when we ran out of spaghetti. You ran out? Asked Mr. Rogers. He took a closer look at his food. Then what is this? Said Mr. Rogers. Lucky me, said Amelia Bedelia. Every leaf I picked up in your yard had a fat, juicy worm under it. Mr. Rogers turned green as a witch. Trick or treat, said Amelia Bedelia, laughing. The end.